right, let's do good morning again. How are you all?
Good.
All right. I am so incredibly excited to be here. I'm excited to see all of you, and I'm excited. God taught me a huge lesson through this passage, and so I pray that it wasn't just for me, but that He's going to share it with each one of us. We're going to be in Mark chapter 10, starting in verse 46 this morning. And as you turn there, I have a question for you. How many of us have ever needed something from Jesus? All right, show of hands. All right. How many of us have ever needed something from Jesus, but we didn't ask Him for it?
Yeah.
We have things that we feel may be free to ask Him for, and then sometimes we don't ask Him for the things we need that might be the most obvious, the most in front of us, or maybe the hardest. But we all have needs, and we all should ask Jesus for them. And sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. But this morning we're going to look at the story of blind Bartimaeus. And I feel like this is one of those things you open it up, and if it was a pop-up book and you could put it to life, it is the most full of life story. It is so rich, it is so amazing, and we'll never dig into it to the full depth of what is here. But we're going to try, and then I just pray that God speaks to you through the week and you reread it and see what He has to tell you, because I think you will find He has more. So we're going to start in verse 46, Mark chapter 10. It says, "Then they came to Jericho. As Jesus and His disciples, together with a large crowd, were leaving the city, a blind man, Bartimaeus, that is the son of Timaeus, was sitting by the roadside begging." So first of all, who is in this picture? We have Jesus, we have His disciples, we have a large crowd, and we have this blind beggar man, Bartimaeus, on the side of the road. Now, I don't know if all of Jesus' disciples were with Him. I don't know who's in the crowd, but there's a variety of people. And there is blind Bartimaeus sitting by the roadside, and what is he doing? He's begging. He's begging. A beggar in that time would have been someone who was outcast, marginalized, poor, unwanted, probably dirty physically. They have no means. They are literally what you would think of as a beggar, but maybe even to a greater degree than what we might understand in our culture today. Let's go on to verse 47. It says, "When he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to shout, 'Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me.'" Let's look at two things. First of all, he hears that it's who?
Jesus.
Of where?
Nazareth.
But what does he call him? The Son of David. The blind man on the side of the road knows who this is that's walking before him. Jesus' followers, Jesus' disciples, just call him Jesus of Nazareth. The blind man sees what those with sight don't see. Do not miss that point. The blind man sees what the followers of Jesus aren't seeing. It's just Jesus of Nazareth. He says, "Oh, no. Have mercy on me. Have mercy on me." And he starts shouting out loud. Oh, the irony of that. He knows it's the Messiah. He knows it's the Son of David. And this is the one time Jesus doesn't shush someone when they cry out. Before then, when the demons are cast out and people are crying out to him, Jesus says, "It's not my time." He tells them to be quiet. Don't tell who I am. But not this time. Because it says that they're on their way to somewhere. They're actually on their way to Jerusalem for the triumphal entry. He is about to become, before all of them, the Son of David and King of Kings. And the blind man knows. The blind man knows who it is. He has eyes. You know, spiritual blindness was not just limited to those in the book of Mark. If we're not careful, we can become spiritually blind. We can say the name of Jesus so often that we forget the power that is in the name of Jesus. We can say the name of Jesus so often and have it written on everything we own that we forget the power and what He is. He is the Son of David. He is the Messiah. He is Emmanuel. He is the Redeemer. He is the healer. And the list could go on. That we don't lose sight of Jesus. because his name becomes too familiar to us. We can become blind. In the book of John, chapter 9, and you don't need to turn there, but for future reference is a great story in comparison of the spiritually blind versus the man who was blind. In Ephesians 1:18 is an amazing prayer asking the Lord to open the eyes of our hearts that we might know. And sometimes we just need to say, Lord, open the eyes of my heart to know you. We might have great physical eyes that see 20/20, but we need to have our spiritual eyes opened. Let's go on to verse 48. Many rebuked him and told him to be quiet. But he shouted all the more, Son of David, have mercy on me. When I read this, and no matter how many times I started reading it, those words, told him to be quiet, just kept standing out, this over and over. Many rebuked the blind man, and they told him to be quiet. Now, we don't necessarily have that same context of going into a city on the road to Jericho and seeing the blind beggars, but guaranteed on our way here, if you drove in today, unless you live in the basement here, you drove past people who would have been beggars, addicted, homeless, prostitutes, destitute, and poor. Guaranteed. They live in houses. They live the next street over. They live next door to us. They might not have been on the street, but we drove past them to come today. People by the roadside. People that we might tell to be quiet. People we might tell to be quiet. Shh. We don't want to talk about it. Don't disturb Jesus. He's busy. He's with us. But there's a second group that sometimes we can tell to be quiet. And it's just, as I said, this just was like leaping off the page to me as in the true sense of it being alive. Who are the people we tell to be quiet? Sometimes because of pride or shame, Satan wants to tell us, shh, don't talk about it. Or he tells us, you don't talk about what you're dealing with because I don't want anybody to know what you're dealing with. And we start believing all the lies in our heads. Or sometimes it's other believers who don't want us to talk about what we're dealing with. I don't want to say that's true, but the fact is it is. Sometimes, you might not want anybody to know that about you. That sounds so terrible. But sometimes we just need to bring things right out into the light and say, this is how it is, and not be blind. Because among the believers, there's the sexually addicted, the pornography addicted, the drug addicted, the eating disorders, mental disorders, poor, over-anxious, depressed, angry, abused, people who have real needs and real hurts and real heartaches. And those people might have been in that crowd that's walking with Jesus, but nobody's calling out to Jesus. Maybe they've been told to be quiet. Maybe they didn't want anybody to know. Shame and fear, hurt, can silence us all pretty quickly, can it not? And no matter what it is that we might be going through, it's as though somehow we can just walk with the crowd, be a follower of Jesus, and not cry out for what we need from him. But Bartimaeus cried out. You know what's interesting is Bartimaeus is the only person healed in the Synoptic Gospels who's given a name. Everyone else has other references. Bartimaeus, the blind, beggar, outcast, poor, has a name. What if we started thinking of people who were poor and outcast and beggars and destitute with names? What if they weren't the addicted, but instead their names were Cindy and Timothy and Jonathan? What if they had names and not titles? Would that change how we see people? Jesus sees us with a name. He sees us how he created us, not just with a title. Whether it's our own title we took on us, or it's a title somebody else gave us, or it's a title of something that we're struggling with or dealing with. But he gave us a name, and Bartimaeus has a name. And that is so important that we know we have a name. 48. Many rebuked him and told him to be quiet. And he shouted out all the more, Son of David, have mercy on me. Now, I don't know how loud he has to shout above the crowd. But he is shouting. He is not going to go unnoticed. James Edwards, in his commentary on Mark, writes, "The kingdom of heaven, it has been said, is not for the well-meaning, but for the desperate." Bartimaeus was desperate. Bartimaeus was desperate for what only Jesus could give him. He sees Jesus for who he is, the Messiah, the healer, the deliverer, the one who has fulfilled the promises. He sees it. Maybe he's been waiting all this time to see whether or not this Jesus is going to show up, and he can't see, but there's that hope within him, that little flickering light, that if Jesus walks past me, they will not silence me. I won't be quiet this time. He'd been saving up all of his energy for the day Jesus was coming. I don't know. The scriptures don't tell us. Let's read the first half of verse 49. Jesus stopped and said, "Call him." What makes Jesus stop? What makes Jesus stop for us? Jesus is on his way to Jerusalem for the triumphal entry. He has an appointment. He has a schedule. What makes him stop for us? What makes him stop for a blind beggar man that everybody else wanted to pass by? I don't know. I know this is that it says in the Greek that the word stop means he stood still. Now I'm thinking if you're walking with Jesus and all of a sudden he stops, people start paying attention. But not only that, but what makes him stop for us? The people are saying, they're walking with him, they're telling him the beggar to be quiet. But he calls out the Son of David. He calls out what he needs. He needs Jesus to be his healer and his Messiah. He shouts to him. Have you ever privately, publicly just shouted to Jesus in desperation? Bartimaeus did, and he did it publicly. He started shouting out. He didn't care what anybody thought of him. The poor, the blind, the beggars, the outcasts are what make Jesus stop and stand still. But here's something very ironic. Jesus says, "Call him." The very people who are telling Bartimaeus, "Be quiet," Jesus says, "You call him." Jesus doesn't call him. You go get it. Has Jesus ever sent us after someone that we wanted to pass by? You want me to talk to them? You want me to invite them to church? You want me to call them or spend time with them? I'd rather not, Jesus. And yet Jesus says, "You go call them." And they do. They call him. And let's look at the difference in the responses of what happens next. Back in verse 49, it says, Jesus stopped and said, "Call him." So they called to the blind man, "Cheer up, on your feet, he's calling you." Isn't it funny how their tone changed when Jesus got involved? Truth be known, what should have happened during that time is when they see the blind man and they're walking with Jesus and they see him begging, shouldn't the disciples and his followers have been running to the blind man then and saying, "Get up, cheer up, we have Jesus with us and we want you to meet him"? But they didn't. That should have been their first response. "Let me show you Jesus. He can give you what you need. He can help you." But instead they wanted to shush him. When it should be our responsibility to walk along and we see others that are desperate for Jesus and we grab them by the hand and we say, "Come on, I want to show you Jesus. Look at what we have. Cheer up. Cheer up. Get on your feet. Let's go see him." But instead, they tell him to be quiet. If Jesus is watching, if we really thought about Jesus watching in our response to people, would we treat people differently? Would we respond differently? Would we say, "Come, let me show you Jesus. Let me tell you what he can do"? Let's look at verse 50 and see what the blind man does. Because I personally think he is priceless. It says, throwing his cloak aside, he jumped to his feet and came to Jesus. For a poor beggar, the cloak might have been his only possession. It might have been all he had. And he throws it off and he jumps to his feet to get to Jesus. He's left his clothes. You'll all understand this when I say that once he dropped his cloak, he might have just been in his night clothes. How many of us are not about to drop our cloak, so to speak, to go meet someone in public in our night clothes? No way. If we're honest, we're not. We don't want to answer the door, and probably rightfully so. But he would have been standing there. He dropped his earthly possessions, his earthly identity, and he jumped up to go see Jesus. Sometimes our own sight can be an obstacle to being humble in Jesus' presence. Because what happens when we can see? We start saying things like, well, who will see me if I do this? If I jump up before Jesus, if I drop everything I have, if I'm not presentable, who will see me? What will they think? Anybody else? There's always that little voice in the back of our heads. What will they think of me if I do this? What will they think? How will I look? Again, the problem of sight. The blind man doesn't know how he looks. And he doesn't know what they're looking at him. So the gift of sight can sometimes cause us to not humble ourselves and cause us to be prideful. I'm not asking the Lord to make me blind, but I am asking him to open the other blindness of my heart that I miss those things. So he jumps up. He is all about Jesus, and he goes to him. It says, and he comes to Jesus. Verse 51. What do you want me to do for you? Jesus asked him. The blind man said, Rabbi, I want to see. All right. We're just going to kind of just pause right here and let this question soak in. If Jesus was with you and he says, what do you want me to do for you? You have one sentence. What would you say to him? I'm not asking you to say that out loud. I'm asking you to contemplate that. You have one moment when Jesus says, and you've been crying out to him, and he calls you up and he says, what do you want me to do for you? Earlier in the book of Mark in chapter 10, James and John wanted Jesus to do something for them, and they wanted to be seated at his right hand and his left hand. They wanted to have themselves exalted. Sometimes verbalizing what we want Jesus to do for us is self-exalting. It's not always a humbling thing when we think about it. How many of you have been in those times, whether you were the person or you were in a group, and let's say right now I just randomly went around the room before we spoke about this and said, let's have your prayer requests. What do you need prayer for? How many of us would ask for prayer for someone else? Will you pray for my husband? Will you pray for my children? Will you pray for my coworkers, my boss, my uncle's dog? And not that those things aren't worthy of prayer. But how often do we get vulnerable enough to say, I need you to pray for me for? How often do we get that vulnerable with Jesus? Where we just go before him and we say to him, this is what I need you to do for me. In my one sentence, I don't need you to fix my children, my home. I don't need you to fix my finances. I need you to do this in me. And this alone.
Hi, I'm so sorry.
You're so right on time. Come on in.
I really was here like 10 minutes ago.
I'm so sorry, ladies. You're fine. What do you want Jesus to do for you? When I first was reading this and studying it, I told you I was kind of stuck on the being quiet thing. And then I really started thinking about what would I say to Jesus? If I was one-on-one with him and he says, what do you want me to do for you? What would I tell him? Well, in that very moment, I love how he gives me fresh stories for you. They're never stale. It was last Sunday. For whatever reason, I got home from church, and I have no earthly reason whatsoever. I've told you all before that anxiety has always been this ugly thing that wants to just live in my garage and show up randomly. And last Sunday was one of those days when I honestly thought, I will curl up on the couch for no earthly reason and just stay here until, I don't know, Wednesday comes. I didn't know why I felt overwhelmed or anxious or it was just there. So I couldn't fix it. Which those are the hardest problems we have, is when we can't fix them ourselves. And my husband couldn't fix it. And I didn't want him to know, here we go. So when this thing hit me, I thought, that's it, Lord. Today, this day, you and me, this is what I want you to do for me. I want you to take this feeling of overwhelmedness away, because it's not real. And it's not true. And it's a lie. I'm not overwhelmed. I'm just, I know what you've done for me, Jesus, and this doesn't fit. But I had to get honest with myself. I didn't need him to help me do tasks. I just needed him to take that right then, right there. When we get one-on-one with Jesus, what is the one question, the one sentence that we would say to him? Remember when I asked you in the beginning, I said, if you ever needed something from Jesus but didn't ask him, having just talked about this, does that change your answer? Are there some things that you need from Jesus that you haven't asked him for? Some one-on-one time? When it's just you and you say, I'm going to be honest with you. This is what I need you to do for me. We all have needs. We all have things that we need Jesus to do for us. They run a wide gamut. Different seasons of our life. What I asked Jesus for on Tuesday is different than what I asked him for this morning. But I was pretty specific because I knew what I needed. Now, how he answered, that's up to him. But I knew what I needed, and I needed to be able to verbalize it and to say it to him. It's getting in that place one-on-one. What are we going to ask him for? So what happens next? He says to the blind man, what do you want me to do for you? And the blind man says, Rabbi, I want to see. I want to see. He didn't ask for wealth, a job, a wife, a good cook, a better cloak. He didn't ask for anything earthly. He asked simply, let me see. I just want my sight. Now, I know that there are people who cry out for healing and God doesn't heal them physically. I don't want that. This isn't if you tell Jesus you need X, that he's always going to give you X in the way that you want it to look. I don't know why. I don't know how he chooses those things. He's sovereign and he's a mystery. But I do know this, that when we cry out to him, when we throw off our cloak, when we jump to our feet, or better yet, when we get to our knees, and we call him and say, this is what I need from you, Jesus, that he stops and he hears us. What he does after that is up to him. But I can promise you he will stop and he will hear you. And I can promise you he will do something. Will it be an instantaneous answer? It might be. It might not be. But he will do something. He does not ignore the pleas of his children. He doesn't ignore the pleas of the destitute and the desperate. He never, ever has. It says that the blind man jumps to his feet. Have you ever just jumped to your feet at the joy of Jesus? Now, you all can use the excuse that we're too crowded in here to go jump into our feet, all right? But have you ever just jumped to your feet at the sheer joy of having the opportunity to speak to Jesus in prayer? I don't think I'm crazy to ask you that question. And I don't think you're crazy if you do it. I say more power. I just go. Be who you are before him. You know, in the beginning, Bartimaeus was saying, have mercy on me, son of David. Have mercy on me, son of David. Now, I'm all about mercy. And I'm all about grace. And I'm all about, the 1,000 times I've prayed, help me, Jesus. Because he hears us and he answers that. Give me grace, let your will be done. But sometimes we just need to call it what it is. Just call it what it is. Sometimes I don't want it. It's just, I don't know what your will is, but this is what I need. How you play that out, that's your will. But this is my need, not just a random, let your will be done in my life, and I hope I have enough mercy for today. He gives us his mercies new every morning. It's promised to us. We just sometimes have to get real. What do you want him to do for you? Verse 52. Jesus says, go. Go, said Jesus, your faith has healed you. Immediately, he received his sight and followed Jesus along the road. Healed in the Greek means sozo, which means saved. Sometimes we cry out to Jesus, we might ask for a physical thing, but what we're going to get is a saving of our soul or a saving of some area of our life, where he's going to He might not heal our eyes, but he might heal some other area that needs to be healed to get us to that point of being healthy spiritually. It says that the man received his sight and followed Jesus along the road. When we started out in verse 46, where was the man? Where was the man in verse 46? Sitting where? By the road. And he's what? He's sitting. So verse 46, he's sitting by the roadside. And what is he? He's a beggar. And he's blind. And he's an outcast. Verse 52, he is following Jesus on the road with his eyesight. So what happened between verse 46 and verse 52 that causes a blind, begging man to be a seeing man walking with Jesus? What makes him an outcast to a disciple and a follower? Well, let's see what happened. He cried out to Jesus. He recognized his need for Jesus. He recognized who Jesus was. He called him out by name. He continued to cry out when other people wanted to silence him. He humbled himself. He told Jesus what he needed, and he immediately got up and followed Jesus. There was no waiting. There was no opportunities for him to be deterred by his friends or his family. He got up, and in that very short time, he went from a roadside beggar outcast to a healed man walking with Jesus and following him. Now, I don't know what happened in the next verses, where he stayed in the journey, but there's a really great chance that he was among the crowd that watched Jesus walk into Jerusalem and get on a colt and go to the cross. There's a very real chance that he was in that group, that he saw the very thing he proclaimed Jesus to be. And that is my prayer for us, that we will see what it is that we proclaim Jesus to be, and that he will open our eyes. So when you pray to him this week, tell him what you need. Wait for him to stop, and then pour it out. Let's pray. Lord, there is none like you. And the fact that you, the King of Kings, Lord of Lords, and God Almighty, that you would stop for us. Right there, we should just be humbled. That you would stop for us. Lord, sometimes we are beggars. We're begging you for all kinds of things, when in reality what you want us to do is just to get up and walk with you. So Lord, show us the difference. Show us the difference, Lord. But Father, I pray for each one of these women today that what they can't verbalize, you give them words to. And what they can verbalize, Lord, I pray that they would say it to you, because we know that you are waiting, that you have stopped for us. And so, Lord, may we walk with you. In the mighty name of Jesus Christ, I thank you, Lord. Amen.
Amen.